On August 29, 2002, two deputy sheriffs in Prince George's County, Elizabeth Magruder and James Arno, were ambushed in the home of the shooter's family. They'd been called to the house to execute a warrant, a health warrant, because the parents were concerned about the erratic behavior of their son. Elizabeth Magruder was shot in the back of the head, and James Arno was shot and killed as well. He left behind a wife, 2 children, and 2 grandchildren. She left behind a husband and a 3-year-old son. I had just been elected state's attorney in Prince George's County, but I hadn't even been sworn in yet. And so one of my first duties was to attend the funerals for both of them. And my first memorial service during Police Week was in their honor. So I take this very seriously. The National Police Week commemoration, I think, is something that is very grave, and we should treat with great respect. And unfortunately, the ambush that Magruder and Arno faced that day, those haven't ended. We just saw recently the ambush in Charlotte. 4 officers were killed, 8 were shot. And we've had others like that all over the country. So my thought when we had Police Week approaching was that we would approach this in a bipartisan manner. And I actually reached out and worked with Congressman Hunt from Texas, and we put together a bill that was aimed at expanding the number of police officers because we know that there are shortages across the country. And we know that we need to increase the pipeline so more officers will come and take on these dangerous tasks and stand in harm's way, stand in the gap, as the pastor said this morning. And it was a bipartisan effort, came out of the committee by voice vote, was passed on the floor in a similar capacity. The Senate companion bill is passed as well, and we're looking forward to that becoming the law of the land in short order. Unfortunately, much of the legislation that's come after that has been anything but bipartisan. And the legislation we're speaking to today, I'm afraid, falls in that category. When I took a look at the bill, H.Res 1213, I'd hoped to see praise go out to our officers across the country for the work that they do, and the officers who've lost their lives in the line of duty. And indeed, there are paragraphs that speak to that. But unfortunately, there's passages that don't. And my colleague from Virginia, in his comments a few moments ago, made some of the same kinds of comments with respect to, for example, the defund the police argument. Now, somehow, my Republican colleagues have concluded that defund the police, a phrase that was used several years ago, is somehow fueling the rise of crime, and in this particular instance, the death and attacks against police officers. But as I just mentioned a moment ago, Magruder and Arno were killed in 2002, over 20 years ago. And we know we've been seeing deaths by officers in the line of duty for decades now. It's nothing new. So to kind of casually blame it on a slogan that I'm not aware of anybody in the body here today that espoused that, certainly I didn't. To pretend that that's the reason that these shootings are occurring, that these killings are occurring, is, I think, unfortunate and an abuse of what this week is supposed to mean. Now, in addition, I would say this. I just mentioned that I don't know that anybody supports the defund the police slogan from a few years ago, but we do have colleagues in the House right now, a House Republican, who has a bill, H.R. 374, to defund ATF, and we have House Republican colleagues who called for the defunding of the FBI. Now, the irony of that, as those of us who've worked in law enforcement know, I was a prosecutor for 12 years, 4 in the federal level, 8 as the locally elected state's attorney. But the local and federal prosecutors work together all of the time. And it's critical, and sometimes they work together in task forces because they can bring the local, the state, and the federal forces to bear and provide maximum support in protecting our communities. But unfortunately, this piece of legislation and much of the legislation that's been discussed this week, that's been offered by my Republican colleagues, intentionally ignores federal law enforcement. In fact, we had one that was marked up in my committee, Judiciary Committee, where I offered an amendment to include federal law enforcement, and it was expressly rejected on a party line vote by my Republican colleagues. And I gotta say, you know, FBI, ATF, Border Patrol, they put their lives on the line too, and we should respect them as well. And so one of the reasons I can't support this legislation is that it really is disrespectful to those federal officers. But the other, I guess, is back to the defund the police issue. There's a recognition in the legislation where it talks about the number of officers who've died in the line of duty in 2021, 2022, and 2023. And I can talk about the specific numbers in a moment when we move forward in the debate, but one provision actually notes that 378 law enforcement officers were shot in the line of duty in 2023. And the one common thread between the vast majority of officers who've been killed in the line of duty, like Arno and Magruder, like the people who were ambushed in Charlotte, like most of the people with the names on the wall just a few blocks away from here, is they were shot. Now, sadly, my Republican colleagues are unable, unwilling, unsomething to take a step to address that gun violence. And you know, the resolution here speaks in terms of defunding the police as the cause of their deaths, but all of us know that the greatest threat that these officers face is not being stabbed to death, is not being beaten to death with a slogan like defund the police, it's being shot to death. And just briefly, 2022, these are numbers from the cops working with the National Fraternal Order of Police. A total of 331 law enforcement officers were shot in the line of duty during calendar year 2022, and 267 separate shooting incidents, including 42 incidents where multiple officers were shot. Now, I appreciate the fact that we're going to offer resolutions to praise officers, but if we're really serious about protecting them, it's hard to ignore a data point like that. Yet our officers have to go out there knowing that they face these threats all the time. They go, traffic stops are particularly dangerous, but sometimes in the home, like for Arno and Magruder. They can be ambushed there, sometimes like in Charlotte. They can be ambushed in the open air. But taking that seriously, I think, is an important piece. Yet the resolution doesn't even mention it. And I'll say this, and then I'll take a pause here for a moment, but you know, there's legislation pending right now in the House of Representatives. I offered one, assault weapons ban. I think, you know, I figured it might be a bridge too far for me to ask my Republican colleagues to co-sponsor that. So I came up with a bill. It's called Raise the Age, and it would elevate the age from 18 to 21 to purchase assault weapons. And I thought that would be a reasonable bill to offer because there was already a provision in the law for handguns. You had to be 21 to purchase a handgun. And I believe that was put in place during the Reagan era. Now, for my bill, raising it to 21, you gotta be 21 to buy alcohol. I thought it might make sense to be 21 to buy an assault weapon as well. And I think we have 170 plus co-sponsors for that bill. But none of them are Republican, not one, even though Republicans had agreed to legislation similar to that in previous years. So, you know, I'll speak in a moment about the resources issue as well. In the 117th Congress, Democrats supported legislation to provide equipment to police officers. We'll get into the particular numbers of that in a moment. But none of that's moving forward here in the House now, and none of it is certainly moving forward in Police Week. But I just want to point out one little factoid, too, from the COPS document that I mentioned before. It's under the heading, Bullet-Resistant Vests. At least 34 officers were protected from gunshots that struck a protective ballistic vest. Yet, we're struggling to find a way to provide additional support and equipment for officers to help them stay safe on the street. That's what we ought to be doing during Police Week. And to the extent we're going to talk in terms of resolutions in support of officers, let's strip out the political nonsense. The defund the police stuff, I think, really has no place in helping to protect police officers and make them safe. And as I mentioned a moment ago, it's a slap in the face the way these legislative provisions have been proposed to always exclude federal law enforcement. I know you guys have issues on the other side about some of them, but I think this isn't the time or the place to express it in that way. Federal law enforcement deserves the same kinds of respect, the same kind of appreciation, the same kind of protection that local and state law enforcement officers do. So I'm going to urge my colleagues to oppose not only this resolution, but we've had others that have come through before, and I think we've urged them to oppose those as well. But I'm going to urge my colleagues on the other side after this vote's over, and you're in the majority, so you can move this kind of stuff whether it really makes a difference or not. But hopefully after we get past this moment, we can actually sit down and get back to the type of legislation that I worked with Congressman Hunt that can really make a difference to help make police officers safer, to help get more police officers on the street, and to praise all of them for the great work that they do. And with that, I reserve.